Okay, that's a classic. This case is a nightmare. Okay people, it's time for part 2 of our little PC upgrading adventure. So actually I thought the next thing I would buy would be a new power supply. But since I ran into overheating problems, yes, I noticed it on many games, not just on Baldur's Gate 3, but also for example Assassin's Creed Origins, I noticed that after a while the CPU temperatures reach 100 degrees. This is basically the maximum tolerable amount. At that point the system starts to throttle down the voltage to reduce performance a little bit and of course prevents damage to the components. The problem with this case is, well, there are several problems actually. The first one is, I would say, that it does not get enough air, because all the air that comes in only comes in through those tiny vents on the sides, so there is literally just not enough fresh air to cool the stuff properly. Also, there is only one tiny fan here that pumps fresh air inside, and it's simply just not enough to cool the whole thing. In addition to that, the hot air that is being generated, the heat that is being generated by the graphics card, is actually being sucked into the CPU cooler here. At that point it would actually be more efficient to just turn it around, so it would suck the cold air from the upper part, but even then there are some tiny holes, but it's definitely not enough to ensure a decent air supply. So this is why I decided to get water cooling after all. It's definitely the best thing that can be done for the CPU. And I got this pretty beefy looking Liquid Freezer 2 280. I think it's pretty much the biggest thing I can fit in there, no pun intended. Of course there are liquid coolers with 3 fans and even beefier radiator, but since I don't have space up there because of the DVD drive, I decided to get this one. So basically, to fit this monstrosity in there, I will have to remove this fan that came by default, and later actually I could place it up there, just like it is on my other PC in the recording studio, because that lid on top can actually be removed. I will just have to get a mesh later, also like on the PC in my gaming studio, to prevent dust and other crap from getting inside. But okay, for now let's just concentrate on getting this massive cooler in there. Yeah, also as you can see, the old thermal paste is totally worn out. This is of course also one of the reasons why it was overheating like crazy. And this case is a nightmare, just look at it. There's literally barely any space for the air to come in. It has to go in there, and then on the other side over there are some tiny, barely visible holes. It's obvious that it will overheat. Actually, the best case of action would be just to cut along those lines, like this, like this, like this. Create one big hole and then put a nice mesh there. I mean, yes, this is again, of course, some MacGyver stuff, some do-it-yourself stuff, but why not? If done properly, if done carefully, it can look good and also work. Maybe I will do this at some point if the cooling should not be efficient. Just gonna allow this here, by the way. Warning! Peel off label before you use it. Yeah, there's this plastic cover protective thingy. Maybe they should also put there and also use thermal paste, just, you know, for idiots. You know, the funny thing is, there was actually somebody on the forums who complained that they cannot get the thing in. Basically, they had the same case as I do, but they had an even smaller cooler. They had a Liquid Freezer 2 240 instead of 280. And they tried to put it on top and failed. So I was wondering why on top if it fits so nicely on the side. Sure, there would be much more fresh air if you remove the lid up there, but I think it really looks way better if it's in the front. Okay, sure, it was tricky. I had to unscrew the fans, put them through the holes, and then screw them back in, so that way the fans and the radiator are on both sides of the structure, and that way also attached that way. So yes, that of course requires some brain activity. I also had to drill some holes, as a matter of fact, because it was not really fitting properly. And don't worry, I did not drill into the radiator, I'm not an idiot. So yes, there will not be that much fresh air that way, so I guess the whole cutting scenario might happen after all at some point. Well, we shall see how good the cooling actually is. But okay, now it's time for a bit more interesting upgrade. The RTX 4070. Without question, the most expensive computer part I bought so far. So I hope this investment will be just as long-lived as my current graphics card, the GTX 1070. It has served me many years, but now it's time to upgrade. Also, this graphics card is actually even bigger. That is also why I removed one of those hard drive holders. This graphics card also has one of those new weird power connectors with 6 tiny pins. Fortunately, they also included this adapter that goes to 2 normal PCIe 4-pin connectors. The thing is, I don't even have 2 spare PCIe connectors with 4 pins. I only have this one with 3+1 and another one with 3. So what I had to do is I had to separately buy this another adapter, which goes from a 3-pin PCIe connector to 2 times 4-pin PCIe connectors. Yeah, it's some nice fuckery, but at least it gets the job done in the end. Also, this graphics card has this weird 3-pin connector. This is actually for the RGB part of the graphics card. There is also a special cable where you plug this into the graphics card, and this end would usually go into the RGB on your fans, if you have fans with this fancy new RGB stuff, and then it would normally go into the RGB header on your mainboard, but since my mainboard is pretty old, it doesn't even have an RGB port. This is basically done so that you can connect all your RGB stuff together and then configure it through a software. Basically so that all your RGB stuff does exactly the same stuff and runs in sync. Fortunately, they made it so that you cannot just connect it into a normal 4-pin connector like an usual fan, because actually this new RGB system runs on 5 volts and the normal 4-pin connector over here, like this one, it actually runs on 14 volts. So if you would try to somehow connect it, it would technically be possible, because this connector, as you can see, it's fairly similar. It has 3 pins instead of 4. The only problem is your RGB would be fried. I mean, it would probably be just the RGB on the graphics card, not the whole graphics card, but yeah, let's not try this out. Also, there is a way to actually get this graphics card's RGB working without having an RGB header on your mainboard, but I shall cover this in another video. I have to say, the water cooling is definitely a bit louder than I expected. The pump is definitely louder than the regular fans, at least in idle mode. With the decent headphones it is not a problem, of course, but you know, it's not like I bought the cheapest water cooling. This one is actually supposed to be one of the best. Anyway, in terms of performance, it's awesome, of course. I tested it with Baldur's Gate and yes, the temperatures are very stable. I did a test with the old and with the new graphics card separately. With the old one it was way worse, obviously. After a while the heat started stacking up and still climbed to around 85 degrees on the CPU. And the fans also went into Boeing 747 mode. With the new RTX 4070 it's a completely different story, of course. It obviously produces way less heat, and that way the water cooling does not get overburdened and the fans actually stay quiet. But since the heat management is still not very good right now, actually it's complete BS at this point, because right now we have 3 exhaust fans and only 1 intake fan. Additionally, the intake fan does not get much fresh air because of that lid above. So I decided to do some additional steps just to be sure. First of all, we are definitely removing that plastic cover so more fresh air can get in, and put a mesh to prevent dust from getting in, just like mentioned earlier. Then I also decided to install one more additional fan to the top from my old spare ones. Also, coincidentally, I found out that it's actually possible to remove a part of this mace in the front cover, and that way ensure a better airflow and hopefully prevent heat stacking a little bit. So now we have 2 intake fans, more fresh air supply, and the exhaust also has it a bit easier. That way the temperatures are obviously even more stable. Now we finally have a cooling build that actually makes sense. So I would say the operation was definitely a success. The second part of of it, that is, there will probably be a part 3 at some point, but that won't be anytime soon, I guess. Because seriously, the way it is now, this will last for a long time. At least I hope so. It is kind of a bottleneck configuration we have now with this monster graphic card and somewhat outdated CPU and also RAMs. So at some point I will obviously have to upgrade, but as I said, probably not this year, maybe next year, we will see. So anyway, I thank you all for watching. If you really watched until this point, then I sincerely thank you all for watching. I really remove my chapeau in front of you. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and we shall see each other in many more future videos. Until then.